I'm Audrey, 28 female. I live in a small, renovated condo downtown, a little bubble of peace I've carved out for myself away from the noise of my family. I'm a senior graphic designer for a marketing firm, a job that lets me pour my creativity into something productive, something that has clear lines and definite outcomes, unlike the messy, blurred edges of my family relationships. This story is about the day my own body betrayed me, and my family's reaction was even more of a betrayal. A final, crushing blow that forced me to see them for who they truly were. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My family has a long and storied history of competitive suffering. It's not something we ever acknowledge, of course. It's an unspoken tournament where the prize is, well, I'm not sure what the prize is. Sympathy, perhaps, the temporary title of the one with the most on their plate. Whatever it is, the one thing you're never allowed to have is a problem that's too dramatic, too inconvenient, or worse, unproven. My mother, Erin, is the reigning champion. Her headaches are always migraines. A common cold is always a near-fatal bout of pneumonia. My cousin Rebecca, her protégé, has mastered the art of the vague, social media-worthy ailment. Chronic fatigue on Mondays, gluten intolerance on Tuesdays, and a mysterious but photogenic allergy to Wednesdays. Me, I was never a contender. I was the dramatic one. Any complaint, big or small, was met with an eye roll and a sigh. "Oh, Audrey, don't be so theatrical," was the family mantra, a chorus led by my mother. It started when I was a kid. A broken arm from falling off my bike was a clumsy bid for attention. A nasty bout of food poisoning was just an excuse to get out of school. By the time I was a teenager, I learned to keep my pains to myself. I'd swallow the discomfort, ignore the ache, and soldier on because the alternative, the skepticism, the casual dismissal, was always more painful than the ailment itself. This particular Sunday started like any other family gathering, with a passive-aggressive comment about my arrival time. "Nice of you to finally join us," Mom said, not looking up from her task of aggressively polishing already gleaming silverware. I was 7 minutes late. "Sorry, Mom. Traffic was a nightmare downtown," I said, placing a bottle of wine on the counter. "There's always an excuse," Rebecca chimed in from the couch, her thumbs flying across her phone screen. She was probably live-tweeting her boredom. At 24, Rebecca's primary occupation was curating a life she wasn't actually living for an audience of strangers. The gathering was in honor of my Uncle George's birthday. George was the quiet dissenter in our family's dysfunctional dynamic. He was my mother's older brother, a kind-hearted accountant who saw the world in spreadsheets and balanced ledgers, and he often looked at his sister's dramatic flair with a quiet, bemused confusion. He was the one person whose presence made these get-togethers bearable. "Happy birthday, Uncle George," I said, giving him a warm hug. He squeezed me back. "Audrey, so good to see you. Don't mind them, you know how they are." He winked, a silent acknowledgement of our shared reality. Dinner was the usual affair, a tightrope walk of navigating conversational landmines. Mom detailed her week of harrowing near disasters at the grocery store. Rebecca recounted a tragic story about a brunch spot that had run out of avocado toast. I stayed quiet, focusing on my mashed potatoes, trying to be as small and unobtrusive as possible. It started subtly, a slight tightness in my chest. I dismissed it as indigestion. I'd had a stressful week at work, a big project launch that had me pulling late nights. I was probably just run down. I took a slow sip of water, trying to breathe through the discomfort, but the feeling didn't pass. It grew, a dull ache that began to radiate from the center of my chest, up towards my jaw. A strange tingling started in my left arm. I tried to rationalize it. A pinched nerve? Anxiety? I was a master at explaining away my own symptoms, a skill honed by years of practice. I focused on the conversation, on the clinking of forks and the drone of my mother's voice, hoping it would just fade into the background. "Audrey, you haven't said a word," my mother observed, her eyes narrowing. "Is something wrong? Are you upset because I said your dish lacked salt? No, Mom, it's fine. I'm just a little tired, I managed, my voice sounding strained to my own ears. The pain was sharpening now, like a hot poker pressing against my sternum. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. My breathing became shallow. Panic began to prickle at the edges of my consciousness, but I shoved it down. Don't be dramatic, a voice that sound. Suspiciously like my mother's echoed in my head. But then the room started to tilt. The edges of my vision grew fuzzy. The faces of my family members seemed to warp and distort. The tingling in my arm was now a heavy numbness. I knew, with a terrifying certainty that cut through the fog of denial, that this was not indigestion. This was something else, something real. I pressed a hand to my chest, trying to rub away the crushing pressure. I don't feel well, I gasped, the words catching in my throat. My mother sighed, the sound a symphony of exasperation. Audrey, honestly, what is it this time? My chest hurts, I whispered, my gaze pleading with her. My arm feels numb. Rebecca snorted from the couch, not even bothering to look up from her phone. Wow, the I'm having a heart attack routine. A bit cliché, don't you think? Anything to get out of doing the dishes. The cruelty of her words barely registered. The pain was all-consuming. It was a vice, squeezing the air from my lungs. I tried to stand, to get to the door to get air, but my legs buckled beneath me. I clutched my chest, a choked sob escaping my lips, and collapsed to the floor. The last thing I saw before my vision went dark was my mother's face, her expression not one of concern, but of pure, unadulterated annoyance. The world came back in fractured pieces. The rough texture of the living room rug against my cheek. The muffled sound of voices, distant and distorted, as if coming from underwater. A sharp, insistent pain in my chest that pulsed with every frantic beat of my heart. I tried to push myself up, but my arms felt like lead. See, she's fine, just looking for attention, I heard my mother's voice say, sharp and dismissive. I cracked my eyes open. The room was blurry, but I could make out their shapes. Mom was standing over me, arms crossed, a look of profound irritation on her face. Rebecca was now off the couch, phone in hand, probably filming. My Uncle George was kneeling beside me, his face a mask of worry. Aaron, for God's sake, she collapsed. We should call an ambulance, George said, his voice tense. And what? Have them come all the way out here for one of Audrey's little episodes? Don't be ridiculous, George. She'll be up in a minute, once she realizes no one is falling for her act, Mom retorted. An act, that's what she thought this was. The pain was so intense I could barely draw breath, and she thought it was a performance. A desperate, burning anger began to bubble up through the fear. I tried to speak, to tell them, to scream at them, but all that came out was a weak groan. I think you're being a bit dramatic, Mom, Rebecca said, her tone dripping with sarcasm as she parroted our mother's favorite line back at her. She was pointing her phone at me. But this is great content. Family drama. The sheer callousness of it was breathtaking. I was on the floor, my body screaming in agony, and my cousin was treating it like a reality TV show. Put that phone away, Rebecca, Uncle George snapped, his voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. He turned back to me, his hand on my shoulder. Audrey, can you hear me? Just hang on. I'm calling for help. He pulled out his phone, his fingers fumbling with the screen. My mother scoffed. You're just encouraging her. You've always been too soft on her, George. She needs to learn that these histrionics won't get her anywhere in life, she said, turning her back on me to start clearing the table, as if my prone form was nothing more than a minor inconvenience, a piece of furniture temporarily out of place. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Each second was a battle to breathe against the crushing weight on my chest. I could hear Uncle George on the phone, his voice calm and steady as he gave the dispatcher our address, but his hand on my shoulder was trembling. Just a little longer, Audrey. They're on their way, he murmured, his voice a lifeline in the sea of my pain. Rebecca had finally put her phone down, her earlier amusement replaced by a flicker of something that might have been unease. She kept glancing at me, then at her mother, a frown creasing her brow. Even she, in her self-absorbed world, seemed to be realizing that this might be more than just a play for sympathy. My mother, however, remained resolute in her disbelief. She clattered dishes in the sink, the sound grating on my raw nerves. "I swear, that girl has been a drama queen since the day she was born," she muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Probably just a panic attack. She reads all those articles on the internet and diagnoses herself with every disease known to man." The injustice of it was a fresh wave of pain. I had spent my entire life minimizing my own suffering to appease her, and now, in the one moment when I desperately needed her to believe me, to help me, she was not just dismissing me, she was mocking me. I closed my eyes, focusing on the sound of Uncle George's voe. Ice on the feel of his hand on my shoulder. He was my only anchor in this storm of pain and disbelief. I tried to regulate my breathing, to slow the frantic hammering in my chest, but it was no use. The pain was a living thing, clawing at me from the inside. The distant wail of a siren was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It grew louder, closer, a promise of help, of validation. Someone was coming who would see my pain, who wouldn't dismiss it as a childish tantrum. As the siren grew deafeningly loud, my mother finally stopped her pretense of normalcy. She walked to the window, peering out. "Well, I hope you're happy now, Audrey," she said, her voice laced with resentment. "You've made a scene and brought the entire neighborhood out. This is so embarrassing." Embarrassing, that's what this was to her. Not terrifying, not life-threatening, just embarrassing. At that moment, something inside me broke. It wasn't a physical break, but something deeper, more fundamental. The love and sense of obligation I had always felt towards my mother, the desperate need for her approval, shattered into a million pieces. In its place, a cold, hard clarity began to form. The doorbell rang, and Uncle George rushed to open it. 2 paramedics entered, their presence immediately filling the room with a sense of calm professionalism that stood in stark contrast to the chaos of the past few minutes. One of them, a man in his early 30s with kind, serious eyes, knelt beside me. "Hi, I'm Paul, what's going on?" he asked, his voice gentle. I couldn't answer. Uncle George did it for me. She just collapsed. She was complaining of chest pain and numbness in her arm. Paul nodded, his focus entirely on me. He took my wrist, his fingers pressing against my pulse point. His partner was already setting up equipment, moving with a quiet efficiency. "My name is Audrey," I managed to choke out. "Okay, Audrey, we're going to take good care of you," Paul said, his eyes meeting mine. In that moment, I felt a flicker of hope. He saw me, he believed me. He attached a blood pressure cuff to my arm and placed small, sticky pads on my chest, connecting them to a portable EKG monitor. The machine whirred to life, a thin strip of paper beginning to spool out. My mother hovered nearby, a self-righteous expression on her face. "It's probably just a panic attack," she offered to the other paramedic. "She's always been very emotional." Paul didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the reading from the monitor. He studied the jagged lines, his brow furrowed in concentration. Then he looked at the pulse oximeter on my finger. A strange expression crossed his face. He looked from the monitor to me and then back to the monitor. His calm demeanor faltered, replaced by a sudden, sharp urgency. The color drained from his face, leaving him pale beneath the warm lights of the living room. Time seemed to slow down. The casual, professional calm that had entered the room with the paramedics evaporated in an instant, replaced by a crackling, electric tension. It all hinged on Paul's face. The way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes widened almost imperceptibly as they scanned the small screen of the heart monitor. He didn't say anything, but his silence was a shout. He turned to his partner, a quick, sharp movement. "Get the stretcher, now, and radio ahead to St. Mary's. Tell them we're coming in hot. Possible SDEMI." The acronym meant nothing to me, but the urgency in his voice was unmistakable. It cut through the pain-filled haze in my mind. This was real. This was serious. My mother, who had been standing by with a look of smug vindication, seemed to finally grasp that this was not going according to her script. "A what?" What does that mean? Is she all right? The irritation in her voice was still there, but it was now edged with a thin, brittle layer of confusion. Paul didn't even look at her. His focus was entirely on me. Audrey, I need you to stay with me. We're going to give you some aspirin to chew, and I'm starting an IV. We need to get you to the hospital as quickly as possible. His partner was a blur of motion, retrieving a small kit, prepping a needle. The term SDEMI, which I now vaguely recalled from medical dramas, echoed in my head. It was a type of heart attack. A serious one. The validation I had craved just moments before now felt like a death sentence. Her heart rate is through the roof, and her pressure is bottoming out, Paul said to his partner, his voice low but carrying in the suddenly silent room. Look at this EKG. Those SD elevations are textbook. He held up the strip of paper from the monitor. Even to my untrained eye, the rhythm looked chaotic, a frantic, jagged scrawl that bore no resemblance to the steady peaks and valleys I'd seen on TV. It was the sight of that piece of paper that finally broke through Rebecca's self-absorbed bubble. "Oh my God," she breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. The pH. One, which had been loosely in her grip, clattered to the floor. For the first time all evening, she looked genuinely scared. My mother, however, was still struggling to catch up. Denial was her shield, and she wielded it with practiced ease. There must be a mistake. She's 28, she's healthy. She can't be having a heart attack. You're scaring her. Paul finally turned to face her, his expression a mixture of disbelief and barely contained fury. "Ma'am, with all due respect, your daughter is in critical condition. Her heart is under extreme distress. The only thing I'm focused on right now is keeping her alive. We don't have time for this." His words, sharp and unequivocal, hung in the air. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's face crumpled, her carefully constructed facade of control dissolving into a mess of confusion and dawning horror. The world she had so carefully curated, where all problems were manageable and all ailments were exaggerated, was colliding with a brutal, undeniable reality. And then the screaming started. It wasn't me, it was my mother. A high-pitched, hysterical wail that was part fear, part guilt, part theatrical performance. "Oh, my baby, my poor baby, what's happening?" she shrieked, rushing towards me. Paul's partner intercepted her, a firm but gentle hand on her arm. "Ma'am, please, we need space to work." Uncle George, who had been standing by looking pale and helpless, stepped in. "Erin, come on. Let them do their job," he said, pulling his sister away. She collapsed against him, sobbing dramatically. It was a performance I had seen 100 times before, but this time it filled me with a cold, detached rage. Even now, in this moment, it was somehow all about her. Her fear, her drama. They were moving me then, a coordinated, efficient transfer from the floor to the waiting stretcher. The ceiling lights slid past my eyes as they wheeled me through the living room, past the half-eaten birthday cake on the dining table, past Rebecca, who was now crying silently in a corner, past my mother's performative hysterics. The cold night air hit my face as they wheeled me out the front door. The flashing red and blue lights of the ambulance painted the quiet suburban street in frantic, lurid colors. Neighbors were starting to peek out of their windows, drawn by the commotion my mother had been so desperate to avoid. Inside the ambulance, the world shrank to a small, brightly lit box filled with beeps and the calm, focused voices of Paul and his partner. They moved around me, a whirlwind of activity, attaching more wires, administering medication through the IV. Paul's face was constantly in my line of sight, a reassuring presence in the chaos. "You're doing great, Audrey," he said, even though I was doing nothing but lying there, fighting for every breath. "We're just a few minutes away from the hospital. The cath lab team will be waiting for you." I tried to thank him, but the words wouldn't come. A tear slid down my temple and into my hair. It wasn't a tear of fear or pain, but of a profound and soul-crushing loneliness. I was having a heart attack, and in the moments when I needed them most, my family had laughed. They had accused me of faking it. My mother's final concern wasn't for my life, but for her own embarrassment. The memory of her words, "Stop being dramatic," echoed in my ears, a cruel counterpoint to the steady beeping of the monitor that was charting the life-or-death struggle happening inside my chest. The betrayal was an ache that was deeper and sharper than the physical pain. It settled deep in my bones, a cold, heavy weight that I knew would be there long after the damage to my heart had begun to heal. And in that cold, sterile, speeding ambulance, a new feeling began to take root alongside the hurt, a quiet, burning resolve. Things were going to be different. They had to be. If I survived this, nothing would ever be the same again. The next few hours were a blur of fluorescent lights, urgent voices, and the strange, disconnected sensation of being a problem to be solved rather than a person. I was wheeled through corridors, transferred from the stretcher to a hospital bed, and surrounded by a team of doctors and nurses who moved with the practiced choreography of a team that did this every day. I remember the cold, metallic feel of the cath lab, the pressure in my groin as they inserted the catheter, and the strange, warm sensation as the dye spread through my arteries, lighting them up on the screen above me. I learned later that I had suffered a spontaneous coronary artery dissection, or SCAD. It's a rare condition, not caused by plaque or high cholesterol, but by a tear in the artery wall. It happens most often in young, healthy women with no risk factors for heart disease. It was, the doctor explained, a case of incredibly bad luck. The team at St. Mary's had saved my life. They had placed a stent to repair the torn artery, and the blood flow to my heart was restored. My first clear memory after the procedure was waking up in the cardiac ICU. The room was quiet, the only sound the soft, rhythmic beep of the monitor beside my bed. A nurse with a kind smile was checking my IV. "Welcome back," she said softly. "You gave us all quite a scare. How are you feeling?" "Sore," I rasped, my throat raw. My chest ached with a deep, bruised tenderness, but the crushing, vice-like pain was gone. "That's normal. You've been through a lot. Your family is outside. Can I let them in?" My family? The word landed with a thud in the pit of my stomach. I felt a surge of adrenaline, my ear monitor beeping a little faster. I wasn't ready. I didn't know if I would ever be ready, but I knew I couldn't put it off forever. Just my uncle first. "Uncle George," I said. The nurse nodded, her expression understanding, as if she had seen this play out 1,000 times before. A few moments later, George appeared at the door, his face etched with worry. He looked 10 years older than he had at dinner. He rushed to my bedside, taking my hand gently. "Audrey, oh kiddo, I was so scared." His eyes were red-rimmed, and his voice was thick with emotion. "Me too," I whispered. "I am so sorry," he said, his grip on my hand tightening. "I should have stood up to her more. I should have called 911 the second you said your chest hurt. I'm so used to her, to the way she is." I squeezed his hand back. "It's not your fault, Uncle George. You were the only one who helped me." We sat in silence for a few minutes, the steady beep of the monitor a comforting presence. His quiet, unwavering support was a balm on my raw emotions. Finally, I took a deep breath. "You can let them in now." My mother and Rebecca entered the room a moment later. They approached the bed cautiously, as if I were a wild animal they were afraid of spooking. My mother's face was a wreck of tear-streaked makeup and guilt. Rebecca just looked lost, her usual snark and bravado completely gone. "Audrey," my mother began, her voice trembling. "Oh, my darling girl, we are so sorry. We had no idea. We thought." "You thought I was being dramatic," I finished for her, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. She flinched as if I had slapped her. "Yes," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes again. "But we were wrong, so terribly wrong. Can you ever forgive us?" I looked at her, at this woman who had spent my entire life teaching me that my pain wasn't real. I looked at my cousin, who had found my potential death to be a source of amusement. And I felt nothing. The anger was gone, replaced by a vast, cold emptiness. Forgiveness wasn't a currency I was willing to trade in at that moment. "The doctor said it's called SCAD," I said, changing the subject. "A tear in my artery. They said it's rare. They don't know why it happens." Rebecca spoke for the first time, her voice barely a whisper. "We saw the paramedic, Paul, in the hallway. He told us what happened. He said you were lucky." "Lucky," I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "Yes, I suppose I am." My mother launched into a monologue of regret and self-recrimination, her words tumbling over each other in a desperate bid for absolution. She talked about how she would never forgive herself, how this was all her fault, how she would spend the rest of her life making it up to me. It was another performance, another drama with her in the starring role, this time as the grieving, guilt-ridden mother. I just lay there, listening, feeling utterly detached from her and her flood of emotions. It was all just noise. Her words couldn't stitch back the pieces of trust that had been shattered on the living room floor. They couldn't erase the memory of her annoyance, of Rebecca's laughter. After a few minutes of this, I couldn't take it anymore. "I'm really tired," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I need to rest." It was a clear dismissal. Uncle George understood immediately. "Come on, Rebecca, let's let her sleep," he said, gently herding them towards the door. My mother hesitated, looking like she wanted to say more, to plead her case further. But something in my expression must have stopped her. She simply nodded, a look of utter defeat on her face, and allowed herself to be led out of the room. As the door clicked shut behind them, I let out a long, shuddering breath. The reality of my situation washed over me. I had survived a heart attack. I was 28 years old and I had a stent in my heart. My life, from this moment on, would be different. There would be medication and cardiologist appointments and a constant, low-level fear that it could happen again. But that wasn't the harshest reality. The harshest reality was the knowledge that the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, to protect me, had failed me in the most fundamental way. They hadn't just disbelieved my pain, they had scorned it. And in doing so, they had shown me who they truly were. The emptiness inside me slowly began to be replaced by something else. It was a cold, hard resolve. They wanted forgiveness. They wanted to go back to the way things were. That wasn't going to happen. They had treated my life-or-death struggle as a joke, a performance. Fine. They wanted drama, they wanted a performance. I would give them one they would never forget. Lying in that hospital bed, with the steady, life-affirming beep of the monitor as my soundtrack, I began to form a plan. The next few days in the hospital were a strange mix of boredom, fear, and a newfound sense of purpose. I was moved from the ICU to a regular cardiac ward. I had a stream of visitors, concerned friends from work, a few distant relatives, and, of course, my immediate family, who walked on eggshells around me as if I were made of glass. My mother and Rebecca were relentless. They brought flowers that made the sterile rooms smell funereal, magazines I had no interest in reading, and an endless supply of apologies that sounded increasingly hollow to my ears. They were desperate to be forgiven, not for my sake, but for theirs. They wanted to erase their guilt, to press a reset button on their cruelty, and go back to the comfortable family dynamic where my needs were secondary to their whims. I offered them nothing. I was polite, distant, and noncommittal. My quiet refusal to absolve them was a far more effective punishment than any screaming match could ever be. It left them floundering, uncertain, and deeply uncomfortable. Uncle George was a constant, steady presence. He brought me books and puzzles, sat with me for hours without needing to fill the silence, and handled the logistics of my life outside the hospital, calling my boss, arranging for my mail to be collected. He was my rock. It was during one of his visits that I put the first part of my plan into motion. "Uncle George," I said, my voice carefully calibrated to sound weak and vulnerable, "there's something I need to ask you." "Anything, Audrey, you know that. When I get out of here, I can't go back to my condo. Not right away. The doctor said I can't be alone, and I'm scared." I let a tear trail down my cheek for effect. "I know it's a lot to ask, but could I stay with you and Mom for a little while? Just until I'm stronger." The lie tasted bitter, but it was necessary. The last place on earth I wanted to be was under my mother's roof, but it was the perfect stage for the drama I was about to direct. George looked hesitant. "Audrey, are you sure? After everything that happened, Aaron will drive you crazy." "I know," I said, looking down at my hands. "But she's my mother, and maybe this is what we need, a chance to heal together." I looked up at him, my eyes wide and pleading. "I don't want to be angry anymore. I just want my mom." It was a masterful performance. I was playing on his deep-seated desire for family harmony, his hope that this crisis could somehow mend our fractured relationships. He was a good man, and good men are often the easiest to manipulate. He sighed, his resolve crumbling just as I knew it would. "All right, kiddo, if that's what you want, I'll talk to her. She'll be thrilled." He was right. When he told my mother my request, she was ecstatic. To her, this was the ultimate sign of my forgiveness. It was proof that she was back in control, that she could resume her role as the matriarch, the caregiver, the center of the universe. She saw it as her path to redemption. I saw it as her path to a reckoning. The next seed was planted the day before my discharge. Paul, the paramedic who had saved my life, stopped by my room. He was off duty, dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, and he looked younger, less imposing without his uniform. "I was visiting another patient on this floor and wanted to see how you were doing," he said, a shy smile on his face. "I heard you're going home tomorrow. That's great news." "Thanks to you," I said, my voice filled with genuine gratitude. "I mean it. You saved my life. I don't know how I can ever thank you." "You don't have to. It's my job," he said, but he looked pleased. "I'm just glad I was there." "The thing is," I began, my expression turning serious, "what happened before you got there, it's been bothering me. My family, they didn't believe me. They thought I was faking it. My mother told me to stop being dramatic. My cousin was laughing." Paul's friendly demeanor hardened. He remembered. I could see it in his eyes. He remembered the tension in that room, my mother's dismissive words. That's not right," he said, his voice low. "I know," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. "And I'm worried. The doctors say stress is a major trigger for this condition. I have to avoid it at all costs. But I'm going to be staying with my mother for a few weeks, and I'm afraid that if something happens again, she won't take it seriously. That she'll just let me die." The words were heavy, ugly, and calculated. I was painting a picture of myself as a victim, not just of a rare medical condition, but of my own family's negligence. Paul's face was grim. "That's a serious concern, Audrey." "So, I was wondering," I said, looking up at him with what I hoped was a look of desperate appeal. "Would you be willing to talk to her? To them, you're a medical professional. You were there. They'll listen to you. If you could just explain to them how serious this is, how quickly it can happen, how important it is that they believe me, maybe then they'll understand." I was asking him to step far outside the bounds of his professional duties, but I was also appealing to his humanity, to the protective instinct that had made him a paramedic in the first place. He saw me as a patient he had saved, and he felt a sense of responsibility. He was quiet for a long moment, considering it. "Okay," he said finally. "I'll do it. When would be a good time?" "They're picking me up tomorrow at noon," I said, trying to keep the triumph out of my voice. "Maybe you could be here then, a final send-off to make sure they understand the stakes." "I'll be here," he promised. The stage was set. The main actors were in place. My mother and Rebecca thought they were coming to bring home their forgiven, fragile daughter. They had no idea they were walking into an ambush, one I had orchestrated from a hospital bed. They were about to be confronted by the man who had witnessed their callousness firsthand, and he would be armed with the one thing they couldn't dismiss: the cold, hard medical truth. The performance was about to begin. The day of my discharge was bright and sunny, a stark contrast to the storm brewing within me. I dressed slowly, my body still sore and protesting every movement. I sat in the chair by the window, waiting. My overnight bag was packed, my discharge papers were signed, and my heart was beating a steady, determined rhythm. Right on cue, my family arrived. Aaron, Rebecca, and George. My mother was all smiles and bustling energy, fluffing my pillows for the last time, chattering about the special low-sodium, heart-healthy lunch she had prepared. Rebecca hovered awkwardly by the door, offering a weak smile. Only Uncle George looked at me with his usual quiet perceptiveness, a question in his eyes. He knew me well enough to sense that my placid exterior was hiding something. "Are you all ready to go, sweetie?" my mother chirped, picking up my bag. "Time to get you home where I can take proper care of you." "Almost," I said, my voice calm. "There's someone I'd like you to meet first." As if summoned by my words, Paul appeared at the door. He was in his uniform today, a deliberate choice we had agreed upon. It gave him an air of authority, of unimpeachable credibility. He stepped into the room, and the atmosphere shifted immediately. My mother's smile faltered. "Oh, it's you, the paramedic." "Paul," he said, his voice level, his eyes fixed on her. He didn't smile. "I wanted to have a word with you all before you take Audrey home." He had their full attention. Rebecca shrank back a little. My mother's hand went to her throat, a nervous gesture I knew well. "Audrey and I were just talking," Paul began, his tone professional but with an unmistakable undercurrent of ice. "We were discussing her condition. SCAD, as you know, is a life-threatening event. She's incredibly lucky to be alive. And one of the biggest risk factors for a recurrence is stress. Extreme emotional or physical stress." He paused, letting his words sink in. He looked from my mother to my cousin, his gaze lingering on each of them for a moment too long. "I was there, in your home, when this happened," he continued. "And I need to be very clear with you about what I witnessed. I witnessed a young woman in the midst of a massive heart attack. And I witnessed a family who was laughing at her, telling her she was being dramatic, and accusing her of faking it to get out of doing chores." The color drained from my mother's face. Rebecca looked down at the floor, her cheeks burning with shame. "Let me be blunt," Paul said, his voice dropping lower, each word a carefully placed stone. "Your disbelief, your mockery, that is exactly the kind of extreme emotional stress that can cause this to happen. Your actions that night were not just unkind, they were dangerous. Had your brother not called 911 when he did, you would be planning a funeral right now." Silence. The only sound was the hum of the hospital's ventilation system. My M. Other opened her mouth, then closed it. There was nothing she could say, no excuse she could make. Paul was a medical authority, a witness. He was validating my reality in a way she could not deny. He wasn't finished. "Audrey is going home with you today because she believes you are the best people to care for her. She is putting her life in your hands. That means if she tells you she has chest pain, you call an ambulance. If she says she feels unwell, you believe her. If she clutches her chest and collapses, you do not pull out your phone and film it for social media. You do not tell her to stop being dramatic. You call for help. The slightest hesitation could be fatal. Do you understand?" He looked directly at my mother. "Do you understand, Erin?" My mother could only nod, tears streaming silently down her face. She was utterly broken. Her narrative of the misunderstood, long-suffering mother had been publicly dismantled by an impartial, authoritative figure. He then turned his gaze to Rebecca. "And you, what you did was not just immature, it was monstrous. You should be ashamed of yourself." Rebecca began to sob, her shoulders shaking. Paul's demeanor softened slightly as he turned to me. "Audrey, you have my personal cell number. If you ever feel unwell, if you ever feel that you are not being taken seriously, you call me. I don't care what time it is. I will come myself if I have to." He then looked back at my mother and cousin. "And if I ever find out that your actions have put her health at risk again, you will have to answer to me." It was a threat, plain and simple, wrapped in the guise of professional concern. And it landed with the force of a physical blow. With that, he gave a curt nod. "Have a good day," and then he was gone. The silence he left in his wake was profound. It was filled with shame, guilt, and the wreckage of my family's self-deception. My mother wouldn't look at me. Rebecca was still crying. Uncle George stood by the window, his back to the room, but I could see his reflection in the glass. He was watching me, and on his face was a look of dawning and not entirely disapproving understanding. He knew this was no random encounter. He knew I had arranged it all. I was the one who broke the silence. I stood up, my movements slow and deliberate. "Well," I said, my voice gentle, almost cheerful, "I guess I'm ready to go home now." The ride to my mother's house was a study in silence. It was a 40-minute drive, and not a single word was spoken. My mother drove, her eyes fixed on the road, her face a pale, tear-stained mask. Rebecca sat in the back, huddled against the door as far away from me as she could get. I sat in the passenger seat, looking out the window, watching the world go by, feeling a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years. I had taken back my power. I had rewritten the family narrative. The stage was set for the final act, and I was in complete control. Living in my mother's house was like living in a mausoleum. The silence was thick, heavy, and suffocating. My mother and Rebecca tiptoed around me, speaking in hushed whispers. Every time I coughed, they would jump. Every time I sighed, they would rush to my side, their faces masks of anxious concern. "Are you okay? Do you need anything? Is it your chest?" They were terrified. Not for me, I realized, but of me, of the power I now wielded. The power Paul had handed me. They were living in constant fear of my next collapse, of the judgment and consequences that would follow if they made one wrong move. It was a prison of their own making, and I was their warden. I played my part to perfection. I was the fragile survivor, the brave victim. I spoke softly, moved slowly, and spent long hours resting in my room. I never raised my voice. I never had to. My quiet presence was a constant reminder of their failure. My every breath was a testament to the life they had almost extinguished through their cruelty and neglect. My mother's attempts to take care of me were frantic and smothering. She cooked bland, joyless meals, monitored my medication as if I were a child, and hovered over me constantly. Her every action was a desperate plea for forgiveness, but I offered her nothing. I would thank her politely, give her a small, weak smile, and retreat back into my silence. My forgiveness was the one thing she craved, the only thing that could alleviate her crushing guilt, and I withheld it completely. Rebecca was a ghost. She barely left her room. The few times I did see her, she would flinch and look away, unable to meet my eyes. Her social media accounts, once a constant stream of vapid selfies and staged adventures, had gone silent. The girl who had lived her life for an audience had lost her nerve. How could she post about her blessed life when the evidence of her monstrous behavior was living down the hall? Uncle George came to visit often. He would bring me books or sit with me while we watched Old Mo. Vise, he never mentioned what had happened at the hospital, but we didn't need to talk about it. There was a silent understanding between us. He saw my plan for what it was, not a petty revenge, but a necessary recalibration of a toxic family dynamic. It was a harsh and painful lesson, but one that was long overdue. The climax came 2 weeks after I had moved in. It was a quiet afternoon. I was in the living room, reading, when my mother came and sat on the couch opposite me. She had been crying. Her eyes were red and puffy. "Audrey," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "I can't do this anymore." I put my book down, my expression neutral. "Can't do what, Mom?" "This," she said, gesturing around the silent room. "This, waiting. The guilt is eating me alive. I see you, and all I can think about is you on the floor. I hear a siren, and I have a panic attack. I wake up in the middle of the night to check if you're still breathing. I need you to forgive me. Please, I am begging you." Her desperation was pathetic. She wasn't asking for forgiveness to heal our relationship. She was asking for it as a sedative for her own conscience. I looked at her for a long moment, letting the silence stretch. I thought about all the years of dismissal, all the times my pain had been minimized, all the moments I had been made to feel small and dramatic. "Forgiveness isn't something you can demand, Mom," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "It's something you earn, and you haven't earned it. You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry for how it makes you feel now. You're sorry you got caught." She started to protest, but I held up a hand. "No, let me finish. You didn't feel guilty when you told me I was being dramatic. You didn't feel guilty when you watched me collapse. You felt annoyed. You were embarrassed. You only started to feel guilty when a man in a uniform told you that you were wrong, when you realized there would be social consequences for your actions. Your guilt isn't about me. It's about you. I stood up. I'm going to be moving back to my condo at the end of the week. I'm strong enough now. I can take care of myself. No, wait, she cried, a look of sheer panic on her face. You can't go. I need to make this right. There is no making this right, I said, the words falling like ice. There is no going back to the way things were. This is our new reality. You wanted me to stop being dramatic? Fine, I have. This is me being calm and rational. And the calm, rational truth is that I don't trust you. I don't feel safe with you. And I don't think I can ever look at you and not remember you standing over me, angry that my heart attack was an inconvenience to your dinner party. I walked out of the room, leaving her alone with her sobs and the wreckage of the family she had broken. There was no screaming, no shouting, no dramatic confrontation. There was only the cold, quiet truth. The aftermath of my revenge wasn't a fiery explosion. It was a permanent, chilling silence. A silence that screamed louder than any argument ever could. A silence that was, in the end, the most dramatic statement of all.